Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today. We will be sharing more about a study that was conducted on small and medium-sized enterprises and how their managers respond in crisis and how this contributes to their long-term survival of their firms. The two strategies we'll be looking at is the conservative or aggressive. More on that later. This presentation will be led by myself, Ugochi Wangu, and my partner, Muntakim Nishan. Thank you. So we'll be taking you through this presentation. We'll introduce the study, share more about why the study was done and the background of it, explain the theories used and the hypothesis as well. Then my colleague Nishan would explain the methodology, summary statistics, results, a study on Canadian small enterprises, and the conclusion. Now, we all know that one thing that every firm is going to face at a point is a crisis. Um, there is a lot of literature and research on how publicly held firms respond to crisis, but there's little research on how small and medium-sized enterprises respond to it. So this study um, proposes that small and medium-sized enterprises often take an aggressive approach. This means they tend to be more, they tend to invest more resources as opposed to conserve resources during a crisis. And this approach tends to be beneficial for their longer term survival. We are talking 5, 10 years after a crisis has happened. Now, when we compare this to all the existing research on how public firms handle crisis, they tend to take a conservative approach, which is more of conserving resources, not investing as much, and trying to take as little risks as possible during a crisis. This paper draws its theory, draws its the basis of the study on the conservation of resources theory to sort of guide the research. So it posits that when individuals face threats or potential resource losses, they tend to adopt a conservative approach, which is focused on protecting their resources, or an aggressive approach, which is aimed at investing their resources. So this paper studies private SMEs' responses to the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis and their survival 10 years after to validate their study. Um, the data they used was from 38,885 Belgian private companies to investigate the behavior of how these firms were able to respond after the crisis. As I already mentioned earlier, this study was conducted because the researchers found there was a gap. There was all this information existing out there on how publicly held firms respond to crisis, but there was little or no evidence on how SMEs respond to crisis. And this didn't make sense given that SMEs make up to 90% of almost any modern economy. So this research is not only valid but is relevant because it would help inform a lot of practical and societal implications given how many private SMEs are in most economies. Um, we also want to know, the study also wanted to understand how private SMEs during the global financial and how the actions taken by private SMEs during the global financial crisis were more beneficial to their longer term survival. They wanted to understand if, given their aggressive approach to investing, were they able to survive after or were they not able to survive? And we also wanted to understand the different types of SMEs. And when I mean types, I'm talking about things such as how many years had they been existing? Were they a 5-year SME? Were they a 10-year SME? And also the industry growth opportunities that affected them during the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis and how this influenced their crisis response. So that's what this study really wanted to understand and focused on. Now, more on the theory. So, like I said earlier, the conservation of resources theory is really to explain how individuals or organizations respond to crisis, the threats they face. Um, as we know, the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis had a pretty significant impact on the business environment. It made it made accessing external funding more difficult. It reduced consumer demand, and made it also changed the consumer behavior because consumers tend were now tending towards finding alternatives to cheaper and different options, given there was not as much money in the economy during the time. So, this time of crisis, managers tend to face a decision where they face threats to their resources and they have to choose, are they going to conserve their resources or are they going to invest their resources? So, the conservative approach is just like I said, is focused on loss aversion. They're trying to do and they're trying to take all possible measures to ensure that they're not losing money and they're trying to take all possible measures to ensure they protect and hold on to their current resources, while the aggressive approach is more of an investing and increasing their resources option. So this is the case where they might be hiring more and doing anything just to ensure that they are taking advantage of the crisis to their best interest. So the conservative approach, managers are that adopt this approach. They're doing so to simply protect their existing operations. So they can do this through cutbacks, layoff, although this might affect the relationships they have with their stakeholders. They see they see this is a better approach to protect their stakeholders' money and their interest in general. This also means involves them reducing their investments, stockpiling cash, and cutting costs to safeguard the firm's core. That is what they're most interested in, just preserving as much as they can. Um, it's also based on the belief that it's better to wait out um, whatever the crisis has changed the environment to stabilize. It's better to wait for the environment to stabilize rather than just taking risks. So they're just doing as much as possible to not lose any money, not lose any resources, and ensure that they keep as much as they can of their firm and their company. On the other hand, the aggressive approach suggests that firms are going to be actively investing and take advantage of all opportunities. For example, they would focus on areas that the firm currently lacks resources and is vulnerable by investing there to generate new options. They would analyze and take advantage of the changing and business environment and try to adapt to it and create value. This is their approach to viewing crisis. They see it as an opportunity as opposed to a risk. So they take advantage of the crisis by finding ways to make things better for themselves. So this involves them investing in cash, capital, workforce, hiring the people that would help them achieve this, and this helps tends to help firms respond effectively to the environment when it's unstable rather than waiting for it to stabilize because they are adapting as their customers, their stakeholders, and their consumers are adapting. They're adapting right along with them, which means they tend to be able to take advantage of whatever behavior or changes the customer and the current environment has to offer them. So this study had three hypotheses, and the first one is that small and medium-sized enterprises that tend to pursue an aggressive approach during the financial crisis will have lower rates of failure in post-crisis years than those that pursue a more conservative approach. Then the second hypothesis states that during the financial crisis, younger SMEs are more likely to pursue an aggressive approach, while older SMEs are more likely to pursue a conservative approach. a little bit on this too. Um, Giving what the study would show, and my colleague would probably explain in more detail, is saying the hypothesis one is showing that because when you take advantage of the crisis, or when you take advantage of whatever turbulence the business environment may have during the financial crisis, this tends to have a better payoff in the long term, because even though you may have some losses, you tend to have more wins because you are able to adapt to the changing business environment while it was happening. The second hypothesis, based on older SMEs tend to have more to lose as opposed to younger SMEs that have less to lose in terms of resources, in terms of investors and stakeholders. Older SMEs would probably have more to lose, which is why they would tend to tip towards the conservative scale as opposed to younger SMEs that are new in the game and would tend to tip towards the aggressive scene as they're new in the game and they have less to lose. And the final hypothesis is stating that during the financial crisis, younger SMEs in industries with more growth opportunities are more likely to pursue an aggressive approach relative to older SMEs and younger SMEs with fewer growth opportunities. Um, this is building off the second hypothesis and is basically sharing that due to depending on the industry, not every industry has the same growth opportunities, especially given the case of the 2008 2009 financial crisis. The industries that were most heavily hit was the financial and the real estate industries, but there were so many other industries that had growth opportunities during that financial crisis, and the industries that did have it tended to see better payoff and were able to adapt an aggressive approach because there was a higher chance of growth as opposed to industries that were in their low growth phase. Now I'll be handing over to my colleague Nishan to take over and lead us through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks to Ugochi for explaining the article's introduction and creating the foundation for this presentation. Hi, I am Nishan and I will walk you guys through the rest of the explanation as well as try to give you an idea how the idea of the article can be applied to Canadian SMEs. First, let me explain you the methodology of the article in regards to gathering data. Financial statements of Belgian SMEs with limited shareholder liability were selected. Not only that, the researchers pointed out a list of conditions to select the SMEs to ensure more refined outcome. Now let me introduce the conditions that all those selected SMEs had to satisfy to be included in the study. First, they must have detailed financial statements each year between 2006 and 2009. Second, have a minimum of one employee to exclude any ghost firms that only exist on paper. Third, they must be independent, have an unconsolidated financial accounts, and according to the definition of SME defined by European Commission, have employees of 250 or less. Fourth, have an annual turnover of less than 50 million euro and assets of 43 million euro or less. And finally, the study excludes any kind of NGOs or public sector firms to make sure all of the governance and policies of the firms align with each other. Before we move on, allow me to give you a short introduction of the financial crisis itself. The 2008 and 9 financial crisis was a chain of unexpected events in the USA. In the aftermath of the US subprime mortgage crisis, collapse of Bear Stearns in March 2008, and the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers in September 2008, that created a tsunami of misfortune events throughout the globe and created this financial crisis that affected almost all the other countries around the world. Our hypothesis one, it stated that SMEs that pursued an aggressive approach during the period will have lower rates of failure in post-crisis years relative to those that opted for a more conservative approach. These two types of SMEs has three manifestations as stated in the summary statistics. Overall, it has been seen that SMEs that choose an aggressive approach in investment of cash, fixed asset, and investment in their employees have seen a lower rate of failure than those of conservative approach takers. It has been seen that calculated investment risks taken by firms has been repaid generously after the end of crisis, helped them thrive after the crisis ended. In the second hypothesis, it was expected that during financial crisis, hoarding cash assets will decrease strongly in younger SMEs than the older SMEs, which is portrayed as in the figures as you can see in the slide. And as research went on, it was quite evident and was found that the increase in cash for older SMEs were 9%, whereas the younger SMEs have seen 19% decrease in their cash assets during pre-crisis and post-crisis events, which is significantly, which is very significant. In terms of investment in fixed assets, the younger firms seem to have invested 1% more than their pre-crisis situation during crisis, whereas the older firms made 60% less investment during crisis. And finally, older firms decreased their investment in employees by 15%, whereas the younger firms increased it by 17% on an average. Let's move on to hypothesis 3, which states that the impact of hypothesis 2 will be stronger on younger firms with more growth opportunities, which we can clearly see in these figures where a three-way interaction term between crisis, firm age, and growth opportunities has been portrayed. Now, we will look at a different scenario to test the study's impact on SMEs in different kind of crisis. Due to time constraint, we could not study a huge number of SMEs in Canada, but we have selected a few highly regarded SMEs that has headquarters in Canada and operations outside Canada that makes them international SMEs and meets the condition of the study as well. What we have found in that companies is that companies like Absorb Inc., Fresh Prep, De Novo Group, and Media Force have taken an aggressive approach during the crisis of COVID-19, and all of these have been huge, have seen huge industry growth as significant as $53 million of revenue growth during the crisis years. And as well, on an average, they invested over 5 million during the year of 2019 and 20, and are now listed among the top SMEs of Canada, which validates the findings of the study as well. Sudden environmental shifts challenges SMEs, and their leaders are tested to craft timely responses to ever-evolving situations in order to survive and thrive after the crisis ends. Some of them become more rigid in their strategic actions, exhibiting a conservative approach, and others are likely to see opportunities to act upon it through an aggressive investment. What has been evident throughout the research is that those who exhibit aggressive approach are more likely to be more successful and see greater growth opportunities in the industry after the crisis ends. Also, while older SMEs and their leaders likes to pursue a conservative approach, younger SMEs are more likely to have found creative ways and proactive ways to make an aggressive investment. Those helps them in the aftermath of the crisis and helps them to become more successful overall. And that's all from us. Thank you for listening and have a great day.